What if the man who could have ended the Pacific War sooner was stopped? Not by the enemy, but by the man standing right beside him. In the summer of 1944, the Allied war machine in the Pacific had reached a pivotal crossroads. Two of America's most powerful and legendary commanders, General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz, were locked in a confrontation that would determine the fate of hundreds of thousands of lives. MacArthur, the imperious general who had escaped the fall of the Philippines in 1942 with a dramatic dash through Japanese-controlled waters, was demanding that the next great blow of the Pacific campaign be directed at the Philippine archipelago. He had made a promise, "I shall return," and he intended to keep it, whatever the cost in blood, treasure, and strategic logic. Nimitz, the calm, methodical admiral commanding the vast naval forces of the Pacific Fleet from his headquarters at Pearl Harbor, looked at MacArthur's plan and saw something that chilled him to the bone. Not bold strategy, but dangerous ambition dressed in the uniform of duty. The clash between these two men was not merely personal. It was a collision of two entirely different visions of how the war should be won, and what America owed to those who would die fighting it. Before this story is over, you will understand why one admiral's refusal may have been the most important decision of the entire Pacific War. If this kind of deep, immersive military history moves something in you, the kind of story they never fully taught in school, then subscribe to this channel right now, hit that like button, and share this video with someone who loves real history. Drop a comment below telling us what you already know about the MacArthur-Nimitz rivalry, or what you're about to discover for the first time. To understand why Nimitz refused, you must first understand who Douglas MacArthur truly was. Not the myth, but the man. Born in 1880 to a celebrated military family, MacArthur had spent his entire life in the theater of war and politics, always positioning himself at center stage. He had been superintendent of West Point, Army Chief of Staff, and military advisor to the Philippine Commonwealth government under Manuel Quezon. When the Japanese struck on December 8, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor, MacArthur's forces on Luzon were caught in a catastrophic sequence of failures that military historians still debate with sharp disagreement. His fighters were destroyed on the ground at Clark Field despite having hours of warning. His supply lines to Bataan were mismanaged. And yet, on March 11, 1942, on the direct orders of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, MacArthur left his beleaguered men behind and fled by PT boat to Mindanao, and from there to Australia. It was from that moment of departure, that haunted, controversial exit, that MacArthur's obsession with the Philippines was born. His vow, "I shall return," was not merely a promise to the Filipino people. It was a promise to himself, a personal redemption he needed as desperately as oxygen. Chester William Nimitz was everything MacArthur was not, and that contrast is essential to understanding the conflict that erupted between them. Where MacArthur was theatrical and volcanic, Nimitz was quiet and precise. Born in Fredericksburg, Texas in 1885, Nimitz came from modest German immigrant stock and had risen through the Navy not through spectacle but through relentless competence. He was a submarine expert, a brilliant logistician, and a man who understood that ego had no place in the calculus of war. When he arrived at Pearl Harbor on December 31, 1941, to take command of the devastated Pacific Fleet, stepping over the physical wreckage of ships and the invisible wreckage of morale, he brought with him something the Pacific desperately needed: steadiness. He had overseen the stunning victory at Midway in June 1942, a battle that shattered Japanese naval power and changed the course of the war. He had navigated the brutal grinding campaigns of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and the Marshall Islands. By 1944, his island-hopping strategy, targeting key Japanese strongholds while bypassing others, had proven devastatingly effective. And now, as Allied planners gathered to decide the next great offensive, Nimitz was staring at MacArthur's Philippine plan with deep, unshakable skepticism. The specific strategic debate came to its most explosive head in the spring and summer of 1944, during a series of high-level planning conferences that would ultimately require the direct intervention of President Roosevelt himself. MacArthur was adamant. The next major Allied offensive must target Luzon, the main Philippine island, and then drive northward toward Japan. He argued that the Philippines represented a moral obligation, that America could not abandon millions of Filipino civilians and prisoners of war still suffering under Japanese occupation. He contended that bypassing the Philippines would be a betrayal of honor that would haunt America's standing in Asia for generations. These were powerful arguments, emotionally resonant and politically shrewd. MacArthur knew how to work Washington, and he had allies in Congress and in the press who amplified his voice. But underneath the moral arguments lay something far more personal: his desperate need to walk back onto Philippine soil and vindicate his own legacy. Nimitz and his planners saw through the emotional scaffolding to the cold strategic reality beneath, and what they found was alarming. Nimitz's central objection to MacArthur's plan was grounded in naval reality, and it was devastating in its precision. The Philippine archipelago is not a single objective. It is a vast, complex chain of over 7,000 islands stretching nearly 2,000 kilometers from north to south. Seizing Luzon would require massive amphibious operations across contested waters, with Japanese air power operating from multiple directions simultaneously. The Imperial Japanese Navy, though weakened, still possessed formidable surface forces and the capacity to contest any major landing. Nimitz and his key planners, including Admiral Raymond Spruance, who had commanded at Midway, and Admiral Ernest King, the chief of naval operations in Washington, believed there was a far more efficient path to defeating Japan. Their alternative was the island of Formosa, or alternatively, a direct thrust through the Mariana Islands, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, cutting Japan's supply lines from Southeast Asia and bringing American B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. This approach would strangle Japan economically and strategically without the enormous cost of reconquering every Japanese-held island in the Philippines. To Nimitz, MacArthur's plan was not heroic. It was wasteful, emotionally driven, and potentially catastrophic. The confrontation reached its most dramatic and historically significant moment on July 26 and 27, 1944, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt traveled to Pearl Harbor to meet personally with both MacArthur and Nimitz and hear their competing visions for the final phase of the Pacific War. This meeting, held at the Kahaluu estate on Oahu, was one of the most consequential strategic conferences of the entire war, and yet it was conducted with almost no formal record by design. Roosevelt, already weakened by the illness that would kill him less than a year later, arrived aboard the cruiser USS Baltimore and was met by both commanders with the full weight of their competing ambitions. MacArthur, in a masterful performance, made his case with theatrical brilliance, invoking honor, obligation, and American prestige. Nimitz presented his maps, his logistics tables, his casualty projections. Two visions of war, one built on narrative, the other on arithmetic. Roosevelt listened to both men across 2 days of intense deliberation, and what happened next revealed the brutal complexity of command at the highest levels of democratic warfare. Roosevelt ultimately sided, with significant modifications, closer to MacArthur's approach, authorizing the liberation of the Philippines, beginning with the invasion of Leyte on October 20, 1944. MacArthur waded ashore at Red Beach with the cameras rolling, fulfilling his vow in one of the most photographed moments of the entire war. But this apparent victory for MacArthur masked a deeper vindication for Nimitz. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought between October 23 and 26, 1944, became the largest naval battle in history, and it nearly ended in catastrophe. Japanese Admiral Takeo Kurita's powerful center force came terrifyingly close to destroying American landing forces before retreating in a decision historians still debate. Nimitz's fears about the naval vulnerability of Philippine operations were not theoretical. They were nearly confirmed in blood and fire across the waters of Leyte Gulf. The cost of the Philippine campaign would ultimately reach staggering proportions: over 80,000 American casualties in the Luzon campaign alone, and hundreds of thousands of Filipino civilian deaths, many in the apocalyptic Battle of Manila in February and March of 1945, a battle so destructive it left the city second only to Warsaw in devastation among Allied liberated capitals. Right here, at the exact midpoint of this story, when the consequences are beginning to reveal themselves in all their terrible weight, is the moment to ask you to be part of this community. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, like this video so more people can find these stories, share it with someone who should know this history, and leave a comment below. Did you know about the Pearl Harbor meeting between Roosevelt, MacArthur, and Nimitz? What surprised you most so far? While MacArthur advanced through the Philippines, Nimitz pursued his own strategic vision in parallel, and the results were historic. The conquest of the Mariana Islands, Saipan fell on July 9, 1944, Tinian on August 1, and Guam was recaptured on August 10. Gave American forces exactly what Nimitz had promised: airfields within B-29 range of Tokyo. From November 1944 onward, American bombers began striking the Japanese home islands with increasing ferocity. The capture of Iwo Jima in February and March of 1945, at a cost of nearly 7,000 American dead and over 19,000 wounded in 36 days of savage fighting, provided emergency landing strips for crippled B-29s and fighter escort bases. The conquest of Okinawa between April and June of 1945 brought American forces to the very doorstep of Japan, setting the stage for either invasion or the atomic destruction that ended the war in August. Every one of these campaigns was part of Nimitz's strategic architecture, the slow, relentless tightening of a naval and air noose around the Japanese home islands that MacArthur's Philippine-centered vision had never fully accounted for. The question of who was right, MacArthur or Nimitz, is one that military historians have argued for 8 decades, and the answer remains genuinely complex and contested. MacArthur's defenders point to the moral weight of the Philippine commitment, the political consequences of abandonment, and the eventual success of the liberation campaign. Nimitz's advocates counter that the Philippine campaign consumed irreplaceable resources, extended the war's duration, and resulted in catastrophic civilian suffering that a more direct strategic approach might have avoided or reduced. What is beyond serious historical dispute is this: Nimitz's refusal to simply defer to MacArthur's ambitions. His willingness to challenge a more famous, more politically powerful commander on the basis of cold strategic logic and professional integrity represented one of the finest examples of moral and intellectual courage in American military leadership. Nimitz never sought the spotlight. He never wrote self-serving memoirs. He never ran for president. He simply did his job, and in doing so, shaped the outcome of the greatest war in human history with a clarity of mind that deserves to be remembered, studied, and honored by every generation that comes after. The Pacific War ended on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, and it was Chester Nimitz who signed the surrender documents on behalf of the United States Navy, standing beside MacArthur, who presided over the ceremony as Supreme Commander. 2 men, side by side in the moment of final victory, each carrying the full weight of decisions made in conference rooms, on beaches, in naval operations centers, and aboard ships in waters that had run red with the blood of young men from a dozen nations. Their conflict had never been merely personal. It had been a conflict between different ideas of what war demands, what honor requires, and what leadership truly means when the cost of being wrong is measured in human lives. History does not give us a simple verdict on either man, and perhaps it should not, but it does give us this: the story of a quiet admiral from Texas who looked a legendary general in the eye and said, with charts and logic and unshakable conviction, that this plan is wrong, and I will not support it without serious modification. That moment of resistance, uncomfortable, professionally dangerous, and historically consequential, is what separates commanders who serve their country from those who serve only themselves. If this story moved you, challenged your thinking, or taught you something you didn't know before, then now is the time to act. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Give this video a like to help it reach the history lovers who need to find it. Share it with a friend, a student, or anyone who believes that understanding the past is the only real map to the future. And leave a comment below telling us